In this lesson, we're going to continue adding detail to the outer frame. Let's maybe start down here at the bottom. I'm going to select these polygons here, and I'm going to use Extrude Inner. And let's do an offset of maybe 2 centimeters here. And let's also switch off preserve groups because we need these to be separate areas here. And now in the perspective view, I'm going to hit S to center the selection in my viewport, and I'm going to extrude these polygons back quite a bit. Let's do maybe something like minus 10 centimeters here to make this nice and deep. And that's all we need to do here, so we can continue maybe with this hole over here. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to select these edges and use connect to create this new edge here. And I also want to connect these edges here. And now we can select these polygons here and use Extrude Inner. And we can use any offset here. So let's do 3 and make sure we switch on preserve groups. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a command called collapse. The shortcut for this is UC, and you can also access this command by right-clicking in your viewport and selecting it from the menu down here. And now in point mode, I'm going to select this point here, and we can bevel this point. But before I do, I think I need to line up the geometry here a little better with my reference image. So I'm just going to move some of these points. Okay, so now let's grab this point again, and I'm going to bevel it, and let's do an offset of maybe 12 centimeters here. So I want to make this slightly bigger than the shape in the reference image. And because we've made this area here an even-sided square before, what we get now is a perfectly round shape here. So if this would have been a rectangle, this round shape would actually be oval. Okay, so that's why I made this an even-sided square here. Now let's go ahead and select this n-gon, and I want to use Extrude Inner again, and let's do an offset of 1 centimeter here and hit new transform, and we need to increase the offset a bit. Let's do 1.7, and let's hit new transform once again, and I'm going to collapse this n-gon, which will result in these triangles. And I want to get rid of these triangles and turn them into 4-sided polygons, and we can do that by selecting these 4 edges here and dissolving them. Let's go ahead and select these polygons here and move them back along the z-axis. Let's move them to maybe 2 centimeters here, and let's extrude these polygons. And I want this hole to be the same depth as these holes over here. So what we can do is we could switch to the scale tool and switch on the object axis. The default shortcut is L, and I have a custom one because I'm using the L key for the selection tools. So let's go ahead and switch on the object axis here. And what we can do now is temporarily move the object axis to one of these polygons over here, for example. So let's go ahead and left click on this polygon here to move the object axis, and now we can switch off the object axis again and scale these polygons along the z-axis, and I'm holding down my shift key to scale in increments, and I'm going to scale this down to 0. Let's do a quick render here in the viewport. You can use this button or the shortcut Control R. And if we render this with the default light, we can't really see that much. So what I want to do is I want to go to the render settings and switch on an effect called ambient occlusion. Let's go ahead and do another render here. So ambient occlusion adds some shadows. It doesn't look pretty and it doesn't look realistic, but it gives me a better impression of how these details look in relation to the entire object here. So that's all I want for now. I want to get a first impression and I want it to be as fast as possible. And you can see that this render only took less than a second. Now, depending on how much geometry we have and whether or not the hyperNURBS is switched on, and also depending on how close we are with the camera to the object, rendering with ambient occlusion will take a little longer. So let me just show you. I'm going to zoom in to this area here and do another render. And you can see this takes much longer. So this took almost 5 seconds. And if we want to speed this up, we could try and reduce the minimum and maximum samples for the ambient occlusion. So let's try 5 for the minimum samples and maybe 32 for the maximum samples. And let's do another render. You can see this is much faster. And it took only 2 seconds. And of course it's much grainier and even uglier than before. But like I said, this is not about doing beauty renders right now. Okay, so that's just fine. But for now, I'm just going to stick with the default settings. Most of the time, I'm just going to render the entire object, and I'm not going to do close-ups of these areas here, simply because the most important thing is to see how these details look on the object as a whole. So let me just close the render settings again. Next, maybe let's do these little holes up here. We can use the same techniques we used to create this hole down here. So in edge mode, I'm going to select these edges here and connect them. And I'm also going to connect these edges here. And now with these polygons selected, I can use Extrude Inner and collapse these polygons. And now we can use the bevel tool to bevel these points here. And this time I'm going to use an offset of maybe 6.5. And let's select these n-gons here and use Extrude Inner. And let's do maybe, one is way too big, so let me just reduce this to something like 0.7. And let's hit New Transform and increase that to maybe 0.8. And let's hit New Transform once again and collapse these n-gons here. And again, I want to remove the triangles by dissolving these edges here. And now I'm going to select these polygons, and as before, I'm going to move these back a bit. Let's move these to 1 centimeter on the z-axis, and I'm going to extrude these polygons, and let's do an offset of maybe -8. Next, I want to do these holes up here, and I'm going to start with the big one at the top. Let's use Extrude Inner again and make this an offset of maybe 3 centimeters, hit New Transform and change the offset to maybe 4.5. And again, I want to remove the triangles here. So in edge mode, I'm going to select these edges and dissolve them. And this will give me 4 n-gons. And I'm going to remove these by adding some edges with the knife tool. So I'm going to cut from this point to this point and from this point to this point. And now we've got 4-sided polygons here. And I'm going to move these back. Let's move these to maybe 5 centimeters on the z-axis and extrude them. And I want to make this nice and deep, so let's do something like 40 centimeters here. Now let's go ahead and do this hole. So same as before, use Extrude Inner, and this time I'm using an offset of maybe 2 centimeters here. Hit New Transform and increase the offset to maybe 3.5. Let's go to Edge Mode and dissolve these edges here. And let's use the knife tool to remove the endguns. I'm going to move these ones back to maybe 4 centimeters on the Z-axis. And I'm going to extrude these polygons. And I want to make this the same depth as this extrusion up here. So I'm going to switch to my scale tool, switch on the object axis, place the object axis on one of these polygons here, switch off the object axis, and scale the polygons down to 0. Now let's take care of this area here. So with these polygons selected, I'm going to use Extrude Inner, and let's do an offset of maybe 2 centimeters here. And if you want to, you can straighten up the geometry here. So again, we could select these points here, switch to the scale tool, switch on the object axis, place it on this point here, switch the axis off, and scale the points to 0 on the x-axis. And let's go ahead and line these points up. So same procedure as before, use the scale tool, place the object axis on this point, and scale the points down to 0 on the y-axis. And now let's go ahead and extrude these polygons back a bit. Let's use an offset of -8 here. And as you can see, the edges on the corners are very close together. But what I want is an even polygon loop here. So what we could do is we could just eyeball things and select this edge here, for example, and move it over a bit. And if you want to be more exact, what you could do is let's go ahead and select these edges. And you can see here in the coordinates manager, these edges are 4 centimeters on the x-axis, and the size of these ones is 4 centimeters on the z-axis. So let's go ahead and select these edges. And this time we don't necessarily need to activate the scale tool. We can use the move tool, the scale tool, or the rotate tool. It doesn't really matter. I'm going to switch on my move tool here, and I'm going to switch on the object axis, and I want to place the object axis on this edge. And if I do that, you can see that the orientation of the axis changes. So let's try this once again. I'm going to switch off the object axis. In order to prevent this from happening, what we can do is select these edges, switch on the move tool, and make sure we switch from the object coordinate system to the world coordinate system. And you can use the W key to switch between these coordinate systems. So now let's go ahead and switch on the object axis and move the axis to this edge here. And you can see this time the orientation of the axis has not changed. And now we can switch off the object axis again and change the size of these edges to 4 centimeters on the x-axis. Let's go ahead and do the same thing over here. So I'm just going to select these edges here, switch to my move tool, make sure that the world coordinate system is still switched on, and I can switch on the object axis, place it on this edge here, switch the object axis off again, and change the size to 4 centimeters on the z-axis. Next, what I want to do is I want to extrude the corner here. So I'm going to select these polygons, and first of all we need to use Extrude Inner, and let's do an offset of 2 centimeters here. and extrude these polygons back. And you can see this is pretty messy. So we can't do it like that. What I want to do is deselect this polygon here and delete these ones. And now we can select this polygon here and use quick extrude by holding down the control key and left clicking and dragging on the z-axis to extrude this polygon back a bit. And now we can select this polygon and delete it, and I'm going to select this polygon again. Make sure I switch to my move tool. Make sure that the world coordinate system is still switched on, and now I can switch on the object axis and place it on this edge here. Oh, and we should have actually used the scale tool this time, so I'm just going to undo that. So let's select this polygon, hit T for scale, and in this case it doesn't matter whether we are in the object coordinate system or the world coordinate system, so we can just switch on the object axis here, move it to this edge here, switch off the object axis and scale this polygon down to 0 on the z-axis. Okay, now let's go to edge mode and use the bridge tool to bridge these two edges, and I'm going to use close polygon hole. The shortcut for this is MD, and I'm going to close these holes here. And for now I don't really want these edges here, so I'm just going to select and dissolve them. And now I want to extrude this area up here. So let's go to the front view, and I'm going to select these polygons here and use extrude. Let's do an offset of maybe -4.5 here. And I'm going to select this polygon up here and this one down here. So these are the polygons at the back here, and I'm going to delete these. And once again I'm going to change the size of these edges here. So I'm going to select these and switch to my move tool, and this time it is important that we are in the world coordinate system. So let's switch on the object axis, move it to this edge here, switch the axis off and change the size to 4 centimeters on the z-axis. And over here I'm going to select these edges and put the axis up here and change the size to 4 centimeters on the y-axis. Same down here. So I'm going to place the object axis on this edge down here, and now I can change the size to 4 centimeters here. And we also need to change the size of these edges down here. So once again I'm going to place the object axis on this edge here and change the size to 4 centimeters on the z-axis. So let's see, next maybe let's do this horizontal extrusion here. First of all, I want to take a look at the render of the finished model here. As you can see, this groove here is connected to the extrusion on the side here. So what this means is that we need to extrude these areas together. But before I start extruding here, I would like to create a polygon loop around the area we're going to extrude on the side here, so similar to these areas here. So let's go ahead and select the polygons on the side here where the extrusion is supposed to be, and I'm going to use Extrude Inner, and let's do an offset of 2 centimeters here. And in my right view I'm going to select all of these polygons here, and delete them. And whenever we delete geometry, we should also make sure that we optimize the object to make sure we don't have any geometry that's not connected anymore. In this case, we have these points here that we need to get rid of. So let's go ahead and select all the points, and I'm going to use the optimize command with the default settings here to optimize the object and get rid of these points. And now we also need to line these points up with these ones over here. And in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm simply going to select all of the points at the back here and move them to 100 centimeters on the z-axis and change the size to 0 to line these up. Okay, so let's go back to polygon mode and select these polygons here, and I'm going to use the loop selection tool to select these polygons as well, and let's extrude these back maybe -8 centimeters, and I'm going to select these polygons at the back here and delete them. And once again, we need to make sure we optimize the object. And also there's this polygon at the back here that we need to delete. And you can see, once again, we need to take care of these edges on the corners here. So I'm just going to select these ones here, switch to my move tool, and place the axis on this edge at the front. And I'm going to change the size to 4 centimeters. Same here. And this time we need to move the axis to this edge and change the size to 4 centimeters on the x-axis. And over here, same thing. Select the edges, switch to the move tool, switch on the object axis and place it here. Switch the axis off and change the size to 4 centimeters. And we need to do this one more time. And change the size to 4 centimeters on the z-axis here. And now we need to take care of this area up here. So I'm going to select these polygons up here and extrude them back with an offset of -8. And we need to delete this polygon back here. And actually I want to do this area a little differently. If you take a look at this render here, on this model I have these grooves extending all the way over the top of the object here, but actually I think it might look nicer if we didn't do that. So what I want to do is select these polygons here, and I'm going to delete this. And once again, make sure you optimize the object to get rid of these points here. And now we can bridge these edges like this, and also I need to change the size of these edges on the z-axis. And I need to change the size of these edges on the y-axis. So now what we can do is select all of these edges all the way up to this edge here, and I'm going to use edge cut, and we need 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 subdivisions here. So let's create 5 subdivisions, and I'm holding down the shift key now to scale these edges and line them up with the circles here in the reference image. Next I'm going to delete some of the edges I don't want. So I'm going to select these ones here and dissolve them. Okay, so now we can select these edges here and use the bevel tool. Let's do an offset of maybe 6.5 here. And I'm using create n-gons here to make sure I don't create any geometry down here. And now let's have a look at this render again. Maybe you can see that these extrusions up here, they're not flush with the front edge of the frame, but they're set back a bit. And in order to be able to do that, we need to create more geometry. So I'm going to use the ring selection tool and grab these edges here and connect them to create this polygon loop right at the center of these polygons. And now what we can do is select these polygons up here and these ones down here and delete them. And let's use the loop selection tool to grab these polygons here, and we need to extrude these with an offset of 4 centimeters to make them flush with these edges here. And next we need to delete some geometry at the back here, so I'm going to select these polygons up here and delete them, and we also need to select these ones down here and delete them. And once again we need to optimize the object, because if you select one of the points on the corners here with only select visible element switched off, you can see there's 2 points here. So this means we have overlapping geometry. So I'm going to deselect everything and optimize the object, which will reduce the number of points to 931. And now in edge mode, I'm going to select these edges here and one of the edges at the front here. And once again, I'm going to change the size of these edges. So I'm going to switch to my move tool, switch on the object axis and place it on this edge here. Let's go ahead and change the size to 4 centimeters on the Z axis. And now I'm going to grab these edges here and one of the edges at the top here, and I'm going to do the same thing. This time I'm moving the object axis to this edge here, and I'm going to change the size to 4 centimeters on the Y axis. Okay, so we're almost finished now. The only thing that is left to do is these round extrusions up here. But actually, I don't want to do these right now because these will be easier to add once we have the control edges for these extrusions here. So that means we're actually done for this lesson, and now we've got all the details that we wanted to add to the geometry of the outer frame. We can go ahead and build the final mesh, and we can start removing n-gons and adding control edges. And we're going to do that in the next lesson.